10 reasons why sub 2 is extremely risky and what you can do as an investor to protect yourself. The seller at any point in time can pop off. They can get crazy. They can say, you know what, I'm gonna call it a bank. If you haven't ran into this ever before, probably haven't owned a sub 2 long enough. Year number 1, year number 2, year number 3 typically isn't the problem. Year number 5, year 7, a decade down the line when they're ready to go buy another house. God forbid your property appreciated. We actually had a couple of these situations where the seller got frustrated back before the hyper appreciation of 2020, 2021. They sold us their house subject to in 2019. They saw all that appreciation, like, well, we should get some of that, and they try to get the notes called due. This will always be a thing when you're working in sub 2. The way to protect yourself is you have a clause in your contract that if at any point in time the loan gets called due because of the seller, you can sue them for damages for upwards of $50,000. Now, I will say that is tough to enforce. At the end of the day, you have to be prepared. If the seller does call the note due, you have to have a plan A, a plan B, plan C. And we're going to talk about that later in the video. So number 2, that loan can get called due. Just like the seller popping off at any point in time, you don't know. Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Chase, at any point in time, they can call that note due. You try to protect yourself just like you would if the seller was to try to get the note called due. The bank can do the same. They see the original owner is not making that mortgage payment and someone else is. They can start asking questions. They can start trying to figure out like what's actually happening here with this particular property. And this will always be a thing. The way that you protect yourself as an investor, you have fail safes in place. Number 1, if you can write a check to pay them off, then you'll never have a problem. The reality is subject 2 is a great investing strategy when you don't have a lot of cash and you're trying to build up your portfolio. You got to either be ready to, number 1, sell it. Number 2, write a check. 3, you can refinance. You can get a brand new loan in place and cash out the bank that's holding the note. Or if the loan gets called due and all the other things we discussed does not work, you could always revert it back to an executory contract. This can be in your underlying paperwork. So the property would technically get deeded back to the original owner. So the bank starts freaking out and losing their shit. And you can go back and say, look, I still will have interest in this property, but I won't have the deed of this property. So like when you go buy a car, they don't give you the deed as soon as you buy it from the dealership. Once you pay off that loan, you then get the title to your vehicle. It's similar in real estate. It's called an executory contract. Depending on the state, you could always revert back to an executory contract to buy you enough time to refinance out the underlying debt so you have a brand new loan in place. Number 3, subject 2 deals are very heavy on paperwork. If you're doing subject 2 deals, make sure you have the right representation. Make sure you have the right paperwork. Just because you have a contract that states that you're doing a subject 2, it's everything you don't know that could hurt you down the line. Having all the disclosures done up front, making sure everything's recorded properly, got to make sure you have the paperwork done right. Most of the deals we do in our business are a mixture of subject 2 and seller finance. The reason why it works for us is because we have in-house TC, which is transaction coordination. I have someone here, literally on the other side of this camera, on the other side of this wall, I have a Cherie in my life, and Cherie makes sure that everything's good to go and the paperwork's done properly. If you've done a subject 2 in the past, you know someone who's done a subject 2, and they're like, oh yeah, it was really easy, filled out like 3 pieces of paper, and then we bought a subject. You know they did it wrong. Make sure you have the right paperwork done. Number 4, many low equity deals have FHA loans in place. FHA is a federally backed loan. So when you go buy a home with an FHA mortgage in place, number 1, most title companies will never close it. There's a lawsuit down the line, or that loan gets called due, you're going to be in trouble. Typically, I try to stay away from FHAs. I will do conventionals, and we'll even dabble in some VAs. So conventional loan, people can have a ton of them. A VA loan is veteran affairs. They're easier to work with when it comes to purchasing them subject to. FHA is inherently more risky. We do have some like in Texas and in Florida that will close on them, but typically when you buy them, you are waiving title insurance on the upfront close. So that's a risk that you're taking on. For me, the way I mitigate this when I go buy, I will personally never buy them. I will assign them, I will wholesale them to another investor, collect a wholesale fee, and keep moving. Number 5, properly setting up insurance on the property. This is huge. You bought this house, you're taking over this big loan, and what happens if it gets flooded? What happens if the house burns down? Well, if the insurance isn't set up properly, that payout's going to go to the bank. That payout's going to go to the seller you bought the house from. Imagine this. You went and you took over someone's mortgage, $280,000 house. The house burned down. They pay off the bank who owns the debt on the property, and then whatever's left, it doesn't go to you. You did all this work to the property. Let's say you fix it up, you had tenants in place, whatever. That payout goes to a person you bought the house from 5 years ago. That would absolutely suck. Having insurance done properly is important. We get a brand new policy before we close. We put ourselves as the insured. We add the underlying seller and we add the first position lender as an additional insured. So making sure that part's done right is very important. And if you need help on that, obviously you know where to go. Number 6, sellers expect you to pay their mortgage and or arrears many times before closing. When you buy a property that you're purchasing subject to, let's just say you contracted it in May and you're closing it in June. If you're buying it and closing it in June 10th, June 15th, these people don't have a ton of equity. They're normally pretty tight on cash. They're assuming you're going to make that June payment on their behalf, even though you're not closing until the 16th or the 14th or the 10th or the 12th or whatever. So you need to make sure that you disclose that you're not responsible for making that payment. Very often, if it's a foreclosure, that's where the arrears come into place. People haven't made their payments over many months. This arrear amount kind of stacks up. You will have to pay that to get that loan in good standing, but you don't do that before closing either. We have this perfect little window of time to purchase these properties. It's between the 16th and the 26th. At the 15th, that payment is late. So you had until the 1st to the 15th, and once the 15th hits, the bank says this payment's late. We like to close the day after. So that way it says, look, unless you want to be negatively affected and your credit score affected on the 15th, you need to make this payment because we're not closing till the 16th or any time between the 16th and the 26th. They make that monthly payment. If I know I'm buying this house and I'm giving the seller $2,000, massively impacts the deal if I need to make their $2,000 mortgage payment. That's as much as I'm paying them to close. I don't want to do that, and that's how you do it. You set up that window of time. 7, your Q1 escrow analysis is super important. Every single year, depending on which bank you're working with, they will have an escrow analysis in Q1, sometimes at the beginning, sometimes at the end. That can change the taxes, and the insurance that gets escrowed can go up because taxes have this funny thing where over time they just seem to keep going up and up and up and up and up. With that being said, you want to make sure you account for that when you buy a home subject to that every single year, end of March, you want to check your escrow balance, which is like if I'm taking over someone's mortgage payment, I can log into their portal and I'm making their payment. I can see what the escrow balance is. Every single year with the changes happening, that escrow balance becomes negative. You want to make sure you zero that thing out and you want to account for the changes. Typically, that's by setting aside about 1.5% to 2% of your monthly payment, setting some money aside. It's not a tremendous amount, but it is enough where it could affect your cash flow. Number 8. Any missed payment can result in a lawsuit. Any late payment can result in a lawsuit. You will lose every single time. And the people that would be suing you is the original sellers. Because guess what? If you don't make that payment or if you're late on the payment, whose credit gets affected? The original seller. They could sue you for damages for not making that payment. So a way to mitigate this is either you always keep it a month in advance. So if I know payments due for the month of June, then I am going to make sure that June's already paid and my next payment isn't due until July. Always a month ahead. Or at the very minimum, if you guys don't want to stay a month ahead, pay it by at least the 28th of the previous month. So you never run into a problem on that. We have performance clauses and all this other paperwork to protect the seller, but we're worried about us as investors. The way we protect ourselves is just staying ahead of the game. Number 9, the property has to be managed after closing all the way until it's properly disposed. The way that we acquire these properties really depends on what we plan on doing with it, right? Am I going to wrap it? Am I going to resell it on the open market? What am I going to do with it? Well, there's a period of time from the time I purchase it to the time that happens where someone has to manage this property. And a big thing that we do is we buy properties in virtual markets. So a big one is having boots on the ground. And typically when I raise money, because I don't use my own money to buy these deals, when I go raise money to go purchase a subject to property, let's just say like, hey, I need to pay the seller $10,000 to walk away. I need to pay a finder's fee of $5,000 to whoever brought me the deal. I need to pay closing costs. So like, oh, okay, I need to bring $20,000. Wrong. You want to bring in $20,000 plus 3 months of maintenance on that property. That's everything from electrical, power, water, having someone cut the grass, plus the mortgage payment. That's what you want to raise. You want to give yourself a little runway there because you will have to manage that property until it's disposed. Number 10, wholesaling these deals can be pretty difficult, even a little bit tricky because you need to vet your buyers. If you're in the place where you want to make quick cash, $10,000 assignment, $15,000, $20,000 assignment, we do that all the time. The reason why we can do it is because we have a highly vetted buyers list. We've been working on this for years. Like we have people on our list that the only way you can get on there, you have to give us a proof of funds, and you have had to at least purchase one of these in the past. If I'm going to be selling you a deal, I don't want you to daisy chain. I don't want you to go sell it to someone else, especially on the creative front, because I need to know who's going to keep the promise that I made to the seller or I made to the agent. It's a big promise. When someone says, yeah, take over my mortgage payments, you're going to do everything you said you're going to do, Matt, I trust you. Well, great. I need to make sure the person I'm putting in the property or the partner I'm bringing in can keep that promise. The buyer's list needs to be vetted. When you purchase a home subject to, there's a lot of bad. There's a lot of reasons why it could suck, and it has a lot of risk involved. There's ways to mitigate that risk. It's a great strategy to acquire properties. Me personally, I wouldn't build a portfolio of these kind of deals because they inherently carry more risk, but they're a great way to get started. If you're trying to get into the real estate game, you're trying to get into investing, it's easier to buy some subject to properties to get your first couple doors, get some cash flow going, understanding the concepts so that you can apply them in different areas of real estate investing. And certainly we still do subject to deals to this day, but it all depends. It has to be a great deal. And anything that I feel like isn't a grand slam, which like is a heavy cash flowing deal and has a conventional loan and the seller's super cool and they sign all the disclosures, it's not that. I will simply assign those, make 10, 15, 20 grand and keep it moving. So as an investor, you have the choice to make. That's the coolest thing about real estate. You can make money in many different ways. There's so many different strategies. This is certainly one of them, one we still use. Now, after watching this video, you now have a better understanding of the risk and how to mitigate that if you do decide to buy one. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any specific questions on subject to, or you found value from this video, please comment below. We'd love to hear from you. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.